Hello, and welcome to the Regrettable Century. It is all of us together again for the first time since February, I think. It's been a couple months.
Yeah.
So Jason, Ben, Kevin, and me, we're all here. And we are returning to a topic that is sort of foundational for this podcast, which would be the lack of any kind of future, or the lack of the ability to conceive of any sort of future, and how we are stuck in what we're referring to as the ever-present present. And
I've also heard it described as the long now.
The long now, yeah, that's a good one. I like that. Yeah, so I mean, like, if anyone who's familiar with us knows that we've returned to this topic in a few different episodes from a few different angles, and the first one being our episode 0 of this podcast, right, which was where we read Mark Fisher, Capitalist Realism.
Yeah, that was episode 0.
Wait. That was the Vampire Castles episode 0, right? Or did we do... Anyway, whatever. It was... One of our first episodes was Capitalist Realism. And then we later returned to the topic when we did Is Capitalist Realism Over? During the pandemic.
The answer was no.
Yeah, it's been a couple years since then. I think we can look back on it and say that capitalist realism is more entrenched than ever.
Yeah, and it's very weird because it feels like I said this recently, like the cultural landscape, the all pervasive sense of the timelessness of everything is still the case, and so a lot of people act like
werewolves,
like we're living in the 1960s and 70s. With the version of activism, the kind
right,
of
yeah,
left culture, the way in which socialist praxis is conceived of is out of step with the reality, I think. But then on top of that, I kind of feel like we seem like we might be starting to enter into a moment in which the ever-present present of neoliberalism is also starting to feel a little bit not yet, but it feels different.
It feels like it's taken some hits, but I would say that there is a key difference between the way that the activists of the 60s and 70s, or even the 80s and 90s conceived, saw themselves and their relationship to like the class or the people or anyone else around them. And that would be like through the lens of an organization, be it info shops or parties or, your local food not bombs. Whereas now, for the most part, people's relationship to activism is event based, right? And it's showing up to a call that's generally put out on the internet. And, otherwise, I mean, there's still like the DSA and the individual chapters that do stuff like that. But I would say that we're much, much more atomized than we were in the early 2000s, the mid 2000s even.
Well, also to keeping with what's germane to this, the title of this episode, the new left very much had a imaginary of the future.
Yeah, that's true.
And so we're stuck in an imitation of a time when that was possible on the left, which is, I think, is Fisher's main critique, right? Is that we're kind of this inverted mirror of the power structure. Like, we've internalized capitalist realism so much that we're kind of mimetic, individuated pieces of it, that we're not reimagining the past. We're just kind of reiterating it blindly.
Well, yeah, we're kind of treating it like it's the present. It's like that now is the same as it was before. It is as though there was not a past, and that's kind of the point, right? Is that our conception of time is, even if it's not, even if we don't formally acknowledge it, our conception of time is very clearly flattened, and it's out of sync, I think, with just the way time actually happens. Our conception of time is it's disjointed, so that we feel like the past is the present. And it seems like the future is also the present, especially when we talk about the the affectations of this nominally revolutionary posture of whatever the left.
You know how we've talked about like the Democratic Party behaving as though the last 10 years didn't happen
Yeah.
electorally? The left kind of pretends like the last, and I'm okay. The left is it kind of has a meaningless referent, but we'll do it anyway. The left pretends like the last 40 years didn't happen in some instances, which is profoundly strange because the left is so entrenched in or oriented towards critiques of neoliberalism.
Right. Well, I mean, and even talking about neoliberalism as though it's not like a constantly unfolding and ever-changing process is incorrect, right? Because the neoliberalism of today looks nothing like what Thatcher and Reagan were implementing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not at all.
Not at all. In fact, like I think at one point we said that neoliberalism is entering like some weird hybrid form where it's the state intervention is not, they're not scared of state intervention anymore, right? They're not scared of like sprinkling a little Keynesianism in when they need to, without fundamentally changing the orientation of like the state and the economic system, the state to the economic system.
And that's been the case for like, what, 18 years? Since the 2008. Yeah, since the global, whatever. Not quite 20 years, but somebody could do very simple math, couldn't correct me.
You remember the ISOs thing, right? That Obama is nationalizing the auto industry. And
yeah, like we thought that maybe Barack Obama was going to begin to FDR it, yeah. And then it's funny, I looked this up this morning just for like the end of neoliberalism as like a search. My query was defined by those terms, and I found an article from 2016, from 2018, from 2020, from 2023, from 2025, and all of them said this moment. It doesn't matter what moment it is. This moment is the moment, which is, neoliberalism has been dealt a death blow. This is the death knell. These are the dying gasps.
Well, I mean, it's like a stabbing death. You can stab someone like 60 times and it'll still take them like days in the hospital before a blood clot finally kills them or something, That's what's going on with neoliberalism. But I do think that the what looks to be the end of global free trade is a serious blow to neoliberalism as we know it.
Yeah.
I know it's not. Neoliberalism and global free trade aren't, one can exist without the other, but the system, the way it works now, they're pretty tied together.
And also in conjunction with that, the potentially, or at least with some constraints, the end of the World Wide Web.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, very much so. Mm-hmm. I listened to Naomi Klein said this, I don't know, sometime in the last few days, that our obsession with finding the end of neoliberalism kind of belies a hesitancy, even a discomfort with just accepting that neoliberalism is much less static than we think it is.
Yeah.
And that really we keep wanting to theorize a new, whatever, neo-feudalism or whatever Yanis Varoufakis thesis, Robert Brenner, what the people who are like desperately saying this is the new thing. Well, finally we can theorize a new way out of. What we're really talking about is, since we still live in the same moment, even if it's more uncomfortable somehow, it's still the same moment, which means that we still just have to start actually figuring out what to do about it.
Right.
And instead,
we keep waiting for a crisis to seize upon instead of like realizing that we've been in like a slow rolling crisis for 30 years now.
Yeah.
At least 20 years.
Yeah, I would say 30 years.
When was the first .com bust? That was a signal of the period of cascading crisis.
Was that 99?
That was 99, I think. That was 20-something years ago, almost 30.
It's interesting how what you're saying about Naomi Klein pairs quite neatly with a very different figure of Catrone, right? Who's saying that instead of this sort of transitioning into a new stage, it's an accumulation of many stages all at once of capital accumulation, which makes a lot of sense to me.
Sure. I mean, isn't that the way that things generally work?
That's the way things generally work. Some of your readings with Varn on the long transition into capitalism, that's the way that worked.
Right.
So why would this be any different? I think that maybe this feeds back into like the anticipation we've been programmed to have of rapid progress, of rapid change that occurred in the 20th century. Yeah. And it's not playing out quite the way we anticipated. Maybe that's why we are anticipating. Maybe this is part of our sort of false Marxist consciousness to anticipate this big break.
I think it's what
Honestly,
it is.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, totally. I think what it is the overemphasis of the subjective portion of the movement of history, right? We think that there's going to be some sort of great rupture that we could seize upon, like happened in the 20th century, which was caused by the First World War, the collapse of the empires, etc. But like that doesn't happen like every 50 years or so. That happens like epocally, right? That happens like once every 1,000 years, you get like a rupture like that, or once every 500 years, you get this massive rupture where the entire system of the way that the world works collapses. Like 1789, 1917. Before that, you had the Protestant Reformation in the 15 and 1600s, or the Protestant Reformation and the Wars of Religion in the 15 and 1600s. And then before that, the Black Death, right? I mean, you've got like every several hundred years or so, the entire world system comes collapsing down on itself. And we're expecting, because we only read the part of Marx that talks about the transition from capitalism to socialism. And we don't pay attention to the rest of Marx, where he talks about the generations and hundreds of year-long epochal change that happens in the transitions from the slave society to feudalism and from feudalism to capitalism.
Yeah, and I also think that 1989 to 1991 felt...
Oh, that's a big one, yeah.
Yeah, that is a very big rupture, very big, dramatic shift.
It was, but that one was also several decades long in happening.
Yeah.
But I think that we've been conditioned, partially just because we have been theoretically lazy, but partially because it seems as though what the 20th century prepared us for is everything speeding up, which means that these epochal shifts, these dramatic revolutions in technological development, everything happens in shorter succession, shorter turnaround time. And so like 1989 wasn't that long after 1917. So any decade now, we should have another 1917.
Well, and 2008 wasn't long after 1990, right? The end of the end of history, so to speak. So it's like, it's really funny that these crises, they've been with us the whole time. I mean, in a subterranean form. I guess what's different about now, relating, say, 2008 to now, is there's a kind of a statecraft involved that's more overt. There's kind of forces trying to engineer a rupture, which I don't...
Very, very badly, by the way.
Very badly. And it's, with 1990, like Chris said, that was decades in the making. It wasn't just Reagan breaking the bank of the Soviet Union. It was all of these other things.
Yeah.
So, it's just interesting to look at all these different efforts to narrativize the past, 30 years, and where different perspectives place the beginning of crisis. Like for so many liberals, the beginning of the crisis started 10 years ago, right?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say this. There's an
2016.
attendant question, which is that really does demand that we consider how we might think of the principal figures, the principal actors of this era. Like, I think, we've gone to some length on this podcast to talk about how lazy and stupid and absurd the Trump is Hitler comparisons are,
Right.
and how it doesn't help clarify anything. And I have made reference to how much I appreciate that it's become much more popular now to compare Yeltsin to Trump.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think that actually is more effective, it's more accurate.
I always thought that Berlusconi was a much better.
Oh yeah, or
Trump.
Berlusconi.
Yeah.
But if it's Yeltsin, then Berlusconi makes a point too. But like when we think about our epoch and in the transformations of the society that we live in happening around us, I think Yeltsin is a good figure. And it's not to say that Trump is any less of a terrible, awful maniac and or moron. It's just he's not nearly as ruptural as a Hitler.
Right. I mean, he's not even as ruptural as a Yeltsin. Yeltsin bombed his own parliament building. Trump hasn't done that yet.
That's true.
He sent some like weird losers into the parliament or into Congress to like fart on Nancy Pelosi's desk, bare-assed or whatever. But like
he unleashed the uncles.
He unleashed the. Okay, so I mean, some cops did get killed, right? A cop died, and some others were battered, and one had brain damage. So yeah, there was violence involved, right? Obviously. But
it's not to say that it was not terrible. It wasn't whatever. It's just not the black shirts.
Like, I don't like that someone died and someone got brain damaged or whatever, but you have to admit that if it wasn't Trump's people that were vandalizing Congress, that it would be an objectively badass thing to have done. And it sucks that it was right-wingers that did it and not like leftists, because we're all a bunch of cowards.
It opens the possibility of what could have been accomplished, perhaps, is more compelling than what they did actually do, which was pretty pathetic.
Yes.
I don't really want leftists to have accomplished those feats per se, because I think they were pretty ineffectual. But
like, we're supposed to be the ones that do illegal occupations,
Sure. But I think it'd be nice if
not the Israelis.
And we were at one point,
right?
Yeah,
but it's still
about Wisconsin. Yeah.
January 6th is still very,
Texas.
very, very, very much in the spectacular realm.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. And it was spearheaded by people who live entirely in the spectacular realm.
Yeah.
With no grounding in reality whatsoever. I'm talking about the QAnon people, that like the QAnon shaman and people like that, who are the ones that were leading this thing.
Yeah.
Because they literally believe in some sort of pseudo Gnostic, revelatory, apocalyptic like fan fiction that somebody's been putting out online.
Here's a provocative question. Are they in a better position to having a future than we are?
Yes, they have power.
Well, actually, so this gets at the Zizek article a little bit. The Zizek article in Jacobin called "What Lies Ahead." This way that we conceive of, things, including the way that we conceive of things which have already happened, will condition what we can conceive of as possibilities, and thus it will actually open up new possibilities. So these deranged uncles having a low-key riot actually do in fact influence events in ways which they have profound consequences, and thus they open up new avenues for future developments. Whereas the left, because of how much the left is not a distinction from liberal, actually.
Yeah.
Is that leftists and liberals are the same things. And all we can conceive of is what is happening more. Whereas for them, it's like what is needs to stop because it's whatever, some kind of apocalyptic crisis, the death of Western civilization. It's I'm not saying we should be like them, but it's probably worth like taking seriously that they have an effect in ways that I think, I don't know, our kind don't.
Yeah. Like there is an intention there to inflict rupture.
Yeah.
On a weakness in the system, and we don't have that anymore.
They've also manufactured a project out of the postmodern abyss that the left has not, which is deeply ironic. Yeah. It's deeply ironic because it was the sort of pseudo left and left that paved the way toward dismantling, structuralism, but that was in tandem with the dismantling of structures and institutions in society. But
what is more post-structuralist than like this current Trump administration and its supporters?
Yeah.
They don't realize it though. They still think that postmodernism is like when you have genders and pronouns and stuff.
This is the reference I was trying to figure out how to make. I should have just looked at my notes. There are two different ways we could think of the future. We just, in English, just one term. But one is the future as a continuation of the present. And that's the one I think that we have in mind. To the extent that there is a left which conceives of a future, it's as a continuation of the present. Or at best, looking backwards to a thing which has already happened. And the future is being a continuation of that, which is just a different present. Right. And the other is the future as a radical break with the present. And that's something that seems to have, at one point, that was our purview. That was, if you were a socialist, you were a person who believed in the future, and you sought this future. You sought this radical break with the present, and this the 0 point that would interpret your everyday reality, because it was you're reaching for this thing. And since we're not doing that, we're not going to get there. And since they are doing that,
this is a very 20th century political thing. Like the radical movements of the 20th century. The fascists come out of the Italian, or part of their motivation comes out of the Italian futurist movement, which is all about like burn down the museums, worship speed and death, like the only way that there is forward, stuff like that. And so that's to a less sort of nihilistic extent, that's sort of the way Bolshevism was as well,
Yeah.
And
the proto whole move fast and break things ideology.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. And so that was like the ideology of the 20th century, right? Of change in the 20th century. And if you look at like both sides of the political spectrum, both ends of the political spectrum now, socialists have lost that imaginary, and so have the fascists, right? Like there's like a weird subset of libertarian adjacent people that are not necessarily authoritarian, except for that when they want the Palestinian students to be deported, and they want, gays to not be able to go to the same bathrooms as everyone else or whatever. But like, they're not fascists. They're just like sort of regurgitating dead ideologies from the 20th century. And wishing that like a dynamic Bonapartist type figure could extend could reinnervate the lifeless corpse of their ideology for a little bit longer. And yeah, that's not the same thing. We've said this a million times now that there's no socialism and there's no fascism without mass politics. And right now there's just the amorphous blob in the center, and then the socialists are stuck on the outside of that blob on one end, and the fascists are stuck on the other.
Yeah, I think it will depend upon what becomes of the state. I think whether there's some kind of, who knows what will become of the the budget for the Pentagon. I'm just, for instance, like
$1 trillion.
I was going to say, yeah, it's going to grow.
Yeah.
The one thing we know for sure is that's
the guy that wanted
that's not changing.
The guy that wanted to sign a treaty with China and Russia to reduce the military budget by 50% has decided to increase it to $1 trillion. Like, how dumb do you have to be to believe any of Trump's like isolationist rhetoric, right?
Yeah. But it's
Still.
hard. It's hard to imagine. One of the problems we're in is it's hard to imagine mass politics without some change in the operations of the state, at least in our context. It's hard to imagine something developing from like militias or whatever, maybe that's barking up the wrong tree.
Well, like you mean like right-wing militias? It's hard to imagine a mass politics developing out of that.
Yeah.
Well, specifically since they've eschewed mass politics and they're like, sort of isolationist paramilitary. When I say isolationist, I mean like localist paramilitaries.
Well, because they're anti-statist.
Mm-hmm. They're like, when I say like pseudo-libertarian, like these sort of, they always get lumped in with fascists because they're white supremacists, but like they really just want like the county that they live in or whatever to be autonomous or some shit like that, or like their farm, to be autonomous.
That makes me think of the anarchist fascists that Kevin was talking about.
They have a mirror. Their mirror image is represented in the kind of pseudo city-state vision of the certain parts of the tech oligarchy, where they're like, where they see a world beyond the nation and say, well, we don't even need the nation anymore. It's too restrictive. It's too many constraints. It's too regulated. We just need city-states where a head of a company can be the head of the whole society, but not the whole society like from LA to New York, but the whole society in the sense of all of what, Seattle, that's a state by itself. And
dude, I would 100% go Garibaldi on that shit.
Oh yeah,
go
absolutely.
Around conquering city states and incorporating them into my new republic.
It's funny because that's this is an example of the way in which I think a lot of people who have a socialistic affectation, sensibilities, are stuck in a vision or in a version of events of the world which doesn't exist anymore, where they say, "Oh, nationalism. The way that the capitalists use the nation." It's like, well, kind of, but not really, because increasingly what you're seeing is a development of what Otto Bauer would have called the naive cosmopolitanism of the bourgeoisie.
Sure,
where the nation itself is starting to be too collectivist, too much of a community outside of what can be controlled more than just employees and customers.
Well, the liberals have certainly embraced that sort of like naive cosmopolitanism that the right wing would call globalism, right?
Yeah.
And when I say the right wing, I mean the non-neocon right wing, like the paleocon right wing. And strangely enough, the paleocon right wing in power looks exactly the same as the neocon right wing when in power. With the sole figure of Trump, who decided to throw a wrench in the works of global trade just recently, to the abject horror of, I would say, most of the people that voted for him and are part of his administration.
And also to the abject horror of all of the people in all the rest of societies around the world.
Yeah.
But principally to the abject horror of the capitalist class.
Yeah,
good news is even though China has 124% tariffs on it, that doesn't apply for electronics. So about like 99% of what the United States needs from China can still get through. But man, that
so it only applies to cheap plastic goods, which China was responsible for manufacturing in the 1990s.
Yeah, or like Temu stuff, like fast fashion clothing.
Yeah, Temu's model is out the door for sure. This is exactly what I don't get, what I'm not seeing. Like I saw articles from like Jacobin and stuff being like, oh, look at the tariffs, neoliberalism's dead, Trump has killed it, and we're moving on to a new global order or whatever. But like, man, he did a fake out and then they withdrew them because markets crashed, and so we're just right back to square one with this weird little thing that blip on the radar that happened. Like that doesn't seem to me like the death blow against neoliberalism. That seems like the best case that you could make for that being a shift is like a spasm of reaching toward something new that totally fucking failed, and the prevailing order is absolutely
itself,
just marching on uninterrupted. It's hard for me to see this as like as anything more than just a momentary aberration, or at most, a grasping towards something new. But it's far from a death blow.
No.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's not just that it's far from a death blow. I would say it's not even like at best, at most, it's grasping towards something new. But that would be quite a bit of a. That would be, well, it's less than that, because I think to grasp towards something new, you have to have an idea of what you're grasping toward, and I don't think Trump has an idea at all.
There's still a 10% blanket tariff on everyone in the world. Like, it's not completely rescinded. And that still is going to fuck up global free trade.
Yeah.
So, like, and then there are some countries that, well, I mean, I guess, like China, obviously. I think China's the only one so far that has it as bad. But that first round of tariffs, which is supposed to go back into effect after 90 days, which you know how that works. He keeps pushing off those 90 days, would essentially just completely destroy free trade. But we don't know what that's going to look like right now. But we do know that there's still going to be a severe damper put on trade by those 10% tariffs. It's even put on people that we have a trade surplus with, that we are exporting more to. Yeah, it's really just nonsensical. It makes no sense. I think you're right, Jason. Grasping towards something, but what? Grasping toward, there's an idea, and it's kind of like the underpants gnome thing, right? Like tariffs, no. Manufacturing comes back. And that we don't know what the no is. It's just some scribbles on the chart, right?
Right, but the manufacturing will be, it won't return jobs because it'll be automated.
It'll be all robots.
I feel like, so I totally take Kevin's point. Except for the fact that Trump has interrupted market forces on a global scale in a way that feels strangely unprecedented in my lifetime, at least. I mean, there have been recessions. There's 2008. There have been things that came about from different policies. There's what Reagan, brought into the late 70s, late 80s, market swings and recessions. But I don't know. This seems different. It doesn't mean that neoliberalism's over, but it's strange. The reverberations of these brief interruptions will be felt. It
feels different. You're right about that.
There's not an immediate recovery of this kind of interruption. It's just weird how the market is gaming Trump. So,
I think the point, though, to my mind, the point though is that this is different. He did something different that nobody else would have ever done, and it disrupted the neoliberal order. But it's kind of like in a capitalist realist sense of the disruption of the neoliberal order reaffirmed the necessity of the neoliberal order.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, it's like exploratory surgery where you figure out, oh God, well, I guess we got to just leave things the way they are.
Yeah.
These two different meanings of future that Zizek introduces that can't be adequately rendered into English from the French and other Romance languages. Futur and avenir. You introduce them without referencing them.
Oh, right.
Avenir is what is to come. not just what will be. It kind of reminded me of like the translation of, the Hebrew "I am that I am," which can also be translated as "I will be what I will be" for Yahweh. It's just an aside, but like it reminds me of how, in some respects, like how trapped in a kind of capitalist realist religious imaginary so many believers are.
Very much so, yeah.
Of course, but that also, how do I say this, influences the way I understand capitalist realism, which is almost like so totalizing to be a religious worldview. There is no, even for those of us who are looking to pierce the fabric, to pull back the veil, we can't seem to find it. There is no seeing past it.
Yeah, well, like I really like when he says that even if indefinitely postponed, the 0 point is through acts which interrupt our drifting toward this fixed point. So the way that we act must be determined by our anticipation of the future. And if you do not anticipate a future other than just as a continuation of the present, you're not going to act in a way which presupposes that that future is something that can be grasped, but it was not necessarily grasped. Or like to put it in the way that Mayakovsky put it was, this planet is not equipped for joy. Joy must be stolen from the future. That's what revolution is. Revolution is when you make possible something which is not possible.
Yeah.
You make it possible by reaching toward the future. When you wage the war for time as opposed to the war for space.
It's like the practical necessity of utopia.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hard to know where to fit this in. Like whenever we talk about what is to be done, right? What do we return to labor? We return to organizing, which is like this pretty basic premise, but also like impossible for all the reasons that we're talking about capitalist realism. So where's the utopia in that? Where's the joy to be stolen?
I mean, I think that part of conceiving of it again is it's at least hinted at in this Zizek piece, when he says that the past is open to retroactive reinterpretations, while the future is closed since we live in a deterministic universe. This means that we must first change, I'm putting that in quotes, change our past or reinterpret it in such a way that it opens up a different future than that which is implied by the predominant vision of the past.
And this is the Benjaminian point, right?
Yeah, exactly. It is the very fact that an event takes place which retroactively creates its necessity.
So how is this different than narrativizing? How is this different than historiography?
I think I might want you to explain that question a little bit more.
How is this different than just sort of telling ourselves a story about how we got here?
No, I mean, I think that is part of it. Yeah, I think telling ourselves a story about how we got here is critical to understanding what here is.
Mm-hmm.
Accurately interpreting the present and thus to actually have a hopeful vision of the future starts with narrativizing. It starts with historiography. It starts with reconceptualizing what has been.
Reconceptualizing the way we talk about the past.
Yeah.
Like the way we understand it.
Like that seems to be a basis upon this the premise of reclaiming a future, but I'm trying to get from here to there, or from there to here.
Reconceptualizing the way we understand the past, I think, is important as an exercise in clarity and in planning for the future. But I don't necessarily know how that leads to like concrete plans for the creation of utopia, if that's what you're asking. Like the reimagining and gaining the concept of imagining utopia happens in the doing, It's sort of like a fake it till you make it sort of situation. We gotta fake like we believe in the utopian future until we create the situation wherein we can,
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to figure out how to say is like, if we think that 1917 was good, 1989 was bad, so then the way we conceive of how we're going to get to some future point is to go back to 1917. That's a guarantee that we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
So instead, it's like we have to conceive of history as more than just the last few years, the last few events. We have to think of them in ways which are like much more multifaceted, much more robust. Where we have to recognize that we're still in the moment that like the Hegel would have talked about the end of history, not that the decisions about the way things are going to be from now on were made in Hegel's lifetime. Like, oh, nothing is going to change from the Prussian state onward, but rather that the end of history is a definition of history as being decided by popular democratic means. And so the way in which we conceive of revolutionary tumult, that's what's going to define the future. We didn't lose, so we have to try something new. We have learned a lot of lessons about what not to do. But we're still in the moment that we were in 1789. We're still in the moment of trying to forge the best way forward when it comes to this new agent, of the absolute, which is the people, the masses, the working class.
You know how I've talked about like the Marxist Pascal's wager in the past, right? Where it's where like, you keep on believing in and fighting for the utopian future, even if you don't think it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you can't conceive of how it's possible. I mean, you continue to believe because what's the alternative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, to me, I think that if we have a hard time conceiving of a utopian future, like it's because there are dampers on our utopian imaginary that are put in place by the utter drab realism of our capitalist present, right? So like, knowing that it once was possible to conceive of a better future and that it was once in our grasp means that we have to imagine that it is possible to imagine because it once was in order to get to where we can imagine, And I know not everybody has the same problem imagining a utopian future that say maybe some of us that have been doing this for 20 some odd years and have seen all of our efforts not even just fail, but be counterproductive actually. Like you might not have this same problem, but I think that sober Marxists, activists, leftists who have been doing this for a long time, who actually look at the terrain and our prospects for the future, are going to have a hard time coming up with, a utopian imaginary that is like plausible. And in that case, I would say the Marxist Pascal's wager is your tool.
Well, like Ben, you made reference, you have a few times over the last, I don't know, year, to ways in which we can be, and we have been very deliberately reconstructing or constructing anew the social bonds which may have been automatic in an older conception of, in an older organization of capitalist society. And so, when we're doing things like intentionally forging communal ties and building community relations, that's actually part of it. That's not, in the past, it was like, since you live in 10 minutes, since you work in a factory, you are automatically involved in a collective social relation with others. And so to construct a communist vision for the future is what you do with that collective relation. In today's world, we have to also forge anew that collective relation to begin with. So that's a big part of how we are going to find new ways to organize, find new things around which to organize, and find ways to actualize a future again, and not by saying, this is the way that the future was conceived of in 1850, so that's the way it is now. But just that the future was once conceived of and can be conceived anew.
Well,
But I do think that the very first thing we're obligated to do is to not wait around for those moments of rupture, but instead we're obligated to constantly forge new communal bonds that I think are shattered and they're severed, and there's a reason why, and that's because those are the things which make it possible. Those are the things which make the future a potentiality.
Well, everything you're saying, and maybe everything we always say, is that it very much sounds like the future is a voluntarist moral imperative. And
yeah, in some sense.
Chad, yes.
Yeah. I mean, not completely, but yes, exactly. In some sense, absolutely.
Yeah.
Not totally, but in the moment we live in now, in the ever-present present, it just seems like a basic fact of being. And
therein lies our defense of proletarian idealism, right?
Yeah.
Well, right, and this is part of what I mean whenever I say, like, to the extent that that's not Marxist, that's fine. That's just the same extent that I am not Marxist. Like, if Marxist must mean that you have to do things in a certain way, according to the way that they were done before, fine. You can have your Marxism. I will just still be inspired by the words of Karl Marx and the actions of Marxists from the past. But I just won't be a Marxist. That's fine.
But that also would hold true for Lenin, in his time.
Well, I mean, that's kind of my point.
So there's something here that I'm hoping I can articulate well, but it's something I've been mulling over a bit about Hegel's teleology, or the teleology in Hegel. And it's this, his assessment of history, that I think a lot of readers render as like Eurocentric and utilitarian, in the sense of, oh, well, these bad things have happened, but it comes out in the wash because it's worth it, because good things are happening as we steam forward into the future. And I don't think that's what Hegel was actually doing. I think what Hegel was doing is more along the lines of what Zizek is calling on us to do here, which is that he is inveighing you, the reader, to engage in an imminent, not critique, but an imminent assessment, I guess, to understand yourself in history and where you're pointed and what history compels you to do. He forcefully rejected any attempts to find wisdom or truth in faraway places or in distant histories. He hated the tendency that was starting to arise around intellectual circles around him that were really into like Eastern mysticism and that sort of thing. And instead he didn't reject those out of a racist rejection of the other, but rather I think that he felt that truth is necessarily imminent. It is right here, right now, not far away. It's not something that's left in the past. The past is in the past, and what is true is here and now. That he wants you to look at history and recognize that everything that has ever happened has led to you being right here in this moment, right now. And you are impelled by history to take up that charge and move forward with that compulsion, with that, I guess you could call it teleology. And he wants you to look at your history, look at the events, look backwards, and take the threads and weave the tapestry of the future together out of everything that has come together to bring you to where you are here and now. So I think that's what we would want to do perhaps is look at the threads of history and find what's the tapestry of the future that we can actually build out of the threads that have been given to us.
Yeah.
Well put.
That's Hegel's teleology, right? It's the same as Marx's teleology. And that's, we as the subjects that act upon history can only act upon history with the material that we've been given. Like we've got threads that we can weave together. That's a good analogy. I like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
And
in fact, I kind of thought maybe even we could end with that, but then I recognize that it is going forward. And yeah. I just mean that's how good it was. It was like that is really like that's a
mic drop
good last word. Yeah.
So good.
But I guarantee.
Well, I'm glad that came out well. It is something that I've been. It's a premise that I've been really mulling with, and because I keep listening to academics talk about. So I'm kind of getting off topic a little bit. Anyway, I keep listening to academics like talking. I'll encounter something about Hegel, and I'll like, oh, I want to learn this, and they'll say something about like, well, he said this, but that's of course because he was, of a time of, whatever, cultural chauvinism and Eurocentric and racist and whatever, they'll just like be he's deterministic teleology, and they'll just sort of like say these things as like a dismissive thing. And I'm just like, that doesn't seem to me like what he's actually saying though.
Yeah.
Like, I think you're misreading Hegel.
Just because an academic reads a lot of Hegel doesn't mean they actually understand Hegel. That's one of the things I've come to, in all of my studies of Hegel, that's one of the things I've come to understand is some of the most well-regarded academics are reading what they would like Hegel to be saying into Hegel. And like not taking him in his own context at all.
Or what they've been trained to read in him.
Right.
There's also that. I think there's a lot of Cliff Notes versions of interpretations of Hegel that they are interpreting. But like Kevin, what you're talking about is so spot on. And again, once again to go back to the Zizek article, we're talking about an inversion of the commonplace, where we are engaged in a historical process and perceive it as full of possibilities, and ourselves as free agents with the choice between them at every moment. That what it means to say we're living in the end of history is just that we exist in this moment full of possibilities, and all of us ourselves are free agents with the choice between them. We're not waiting, and we shouldn't be waiting for an Alexander the Great, or for a Napoleon Bonaparte, or for a Joseph Stalin. There's nobody else. No one's coming to save us. We're the ones we've been waiting for. All that. That's what that means. But if we're waiting for this ruptural moment to happen to us so that we can then act, it will never happen. Because it's in acting that we unleash the potentialities, which will then retroactively be recognized by us as historical necessity.
There's this brief passage that I was reminded of from what you said, Kevin. And I don't know whether Zizek's quoting Zhao Enlai, the Chinese prime minister, or Badiou. He quotes Badiou later. It could be him, but he's in this quote of whoever this is. It says, "Insofar as the future is not rendered present, one has to think it as simultaneously inclusive of the catastrophic event and of its not taking place, not as disjunctive possibilities, but as a conjunction of states, one or the other of which will reveal itself a posteriori as necessary, the moment the present will choose it." So you kind of helped me understand that in what you said. I was puzzled by that because I guess my question about historiography was sort of alluding to like, I sense we're talking about more than just choosing our own adventure aimed at the past, back to the future. Because that's pretty much what the right-wing project is, right? It's like narrativizing the past in a false sense to create, the inversion of that as a false future. But the weaving metaphor helped me understand that. We're weaving ourselves and in the same sense weaving a future.
Yeah.
And in the sense, back to when we were reading Hegel together, when he's talking about how we're basically, to use your example, we have all this received wisdom and teaching and knowledge that we haven't earned. And that pertains to ourselves as well.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a lot. That's a lot to try and synthesize into a project. The project of being.
That's all we're doing. We're just trying to figure out how to be.
Yeah.
All we're doing is thinking about thinking.
Yeah. I mean, that's like half the struggle of life is just figuring out how to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Ascending towards greater degrees of self-consciousness, and hence ascending toward godhood.
Yeah, that's even exactly right. That's what we're here for. That's what we're doing.
And maybe in that sense, that is where it's more than just a voluntarist project, because in order to proceed along those lines, we need each other.
Yeah.
We need to think with each other. That's necessarily collective.
Right. And the most probably fundamentally revolutionary thing that we as subjects in the 21st century can do is learn to reimagine life as a collective. I mean, like we've been, I don't mean on an individual level, obviously, but that is possible. That is important too. Like, because it has to start with us as individuals actively, inserting ourselves into a project that rebuilds a collectivity of some sort. And so individually, we've got to train ourselves to think of ourselves as part of some sort of universal, right? Some sort of collective, some sort of like class or something,
It's funny because I think that's what Zizek meant, not in this article, but just in a different one entirely. He said, it's not enough just to act. Don't just act. Talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reversal of Zizek's don't just talk, act. Don't just act, talk. Don't just do something, sit there and think and talk, figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what we have done for the last several decades is just act.
Yep.
Increasingly.
There's a fetishization of just do something. Work.
Just do the work. Trust the process and do the work, and it will all sort itself out. But obviously, that's not true.
Yeah. It definitely will not sort itself out.
Right.
And again, that's what we mean when we say we have pessimism, not for what can be, but pessimism when it comes to imagining what is growing into what can be, because what can be is only possible because of a rejection of what is. I'm pessimistic about what we have known, what we have come to know as the way to act, but not pessimistic about our potential for thinking of new ways to act.
I believe I first heard him say that during Occupy, that we need
that would
to
make sense.
It's really important and he was ignored. But it reminds me of one of the Mark Fisher lectures you sent us, Jason. He's talking about I think it's content that was in Ghosts of My Life, where he's talking about we've been freed of boredom, and that's been a loss. We've lost the experience of boredom to an experience of endless anxiety. And that's sort of where the doing exists today, is in this anxiety where we don't have the time to be bored and think about basically what Kevin said earlier so well,
Like, when was the last time you sat at the bus stop with nothing to do? When you sat in line at the DMV without headphones, without Instagram to scroll through? When was the last time you were like in a long line at the grocery store and you had nothing other than the people around you, or else the magazines or whatever, to like occupy your attention?
Well, that was probably like 2008, maybe. When did I get my first smartphone?
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny because it really is about the same amount of time as it has been that we are assessing, more or less.
Well, when did I start downloading audiobooks onto my iPod because that was the last time I had dead space to think. You know, that would have probably been in 2007, 2008, something like that. But yeah.
I've taken to very deliberately not filling in the dead space. Like, I took my speaker out of the bathroom, so I don't take a shower with podcasts anymore. I just take a shower with nothing but just my thoughts. Because even if that's all that, even if there's only one time in the whole day where it's just me and my thoughts, because I'm in the shower, I can't do anything about it until I get out, and that makes me, at a minimum, a few minutes a day with just what happens in my own head and nothing else. And I've found that to actually that turns out to be very, very helpful, very useful. Yeah. And I've extended that to be like, I take walks, I do the dishes, whatever when I might have otherwise had headphones, listened to even music or a podcast or something. I have a task to do, and so I have nothing else to occupy my brain other than what I think of. And I have found that is mentally very healthy, if nothing else. And also, a lot of that time I use to pray.
Yeah.
So I either think and ponder and imagine, or I pray. And in both cases, that's better than letting somebody else's thoughts take over the dead space that my thoughts might fill, if not.
My headphones went out at the gym the other day. And, well, first of all,
if there's one place where the headphones are necessary, that's the gym.
Well, I was going to say, it was sort of, I was expecting it to be way worse than it was. But for whatever reason, somebody had put on 90s music. So I ended up having an intense nostalgia-fueled workout with music that I would have hated back in the 90s. But now it just reminds me of back when people used to have hope for the future, Back
when there used to be bands.
Yeah, when there used to be bands. For real, yeah. I mean, but anyway, so I was just sitting there and thinking about the way that I thought my life would turn out. Because that's inevitably what I do whenever I listen to music that I listened to when I was a kid. Oh, so I was getting deeply nostalgic listening to Red Red Wine by UB40.
Yep.
Hell yeah.
while doing incline bench press.
I spend so much of most of the music I consume is from the past, before the 80s,
oh, yeah.
before I was born. I spend most of my time in the mid-century jazz and country realm. And this has gotten me sort of reflecting on that, mean, this topic, why have I always sought some kind of refuge culturally in this, why have I always found I learned more, took more from, when my parents were kids or when my grandparents were still young, than the moment in which I live.
Did you watch the Mark Fisher lecture where he talks about cultural stagnation?
Yeah. It makes sense. Well, it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm the same way. Pretty much everything that I listen to is all of the bands that I grew up listening to, all the punk bands that I really, really liked were from a generation before me, right? Because I was born in the 80s, but I didn't start listening to music until nobody was really listening to that sort of stuff anymore, until the whole punk revival in the late 90s or whatever. But so all the stuff that I grew up on was bands that had broken up 15 years before I ever found them, like Minor Threat and, the Misfits and stuff like that. And then, so now as a person in their 40s, a lot of the stuff that I listen to is music from 50 years ago, and music that, I used to listen to when I was a kid. And if it's not that, it's I've been really getting into hard bop lately. So
really?
I've been listening. Yeah. I mean, it's stuff that I'd listened to before. And I have an old playlist on my Spotify that I made that starts off with Art Blakey and,
oh, nice,
stuff like that. So I've been listening to that a lot lately while I read and while I do chores and stuff. And then the other thing that I listen to all the time is black metal, that's like very romantic and atmospheric and almost more mood music than anything that's like, in that takes up space in my mind. It's in the background, even when I'm listening to it on headphones, very loud. And what that is it's very nostalgic. It makes me think of like, it's very Sehnsucht inducing, right? Like when I hear the sweeping, like atmospheric black metal, it's like painting a landscape in front of me of like mist shrouded forests and peaks of mountains that are unspoiled by like industrial modernity or whatever. So it's like Mark Fisher is absolutely spot on in that we are, there's been a sort of cultural stagnation, and we're trying to listen to something that sparks in us a feeling of when we felt okay. Right. And that's why we keep regurgitating the same sort of sound in different ways. And I definitely see where he's coming from there.
It also makes me wonder, though, if there aren't exceptions,
Sure. There's like that band that was dressed up like clowns and played like jazz like math metal in a porta potty. Do you remember that video? That's new. Kevin's shaking his head like, what the fuck? Yeah, there's just this like there was this video that came out a few years ago, and it was like all these guys dressed up like clowns, and there was a sample machine, like a drummer and a guitarist and a guy with a saxophone, and it was just like chaotic sort of like Dillinger Escape Plan style, like math metal, and then a saxophone, and it was all filmed in a porta potty. So yeah, there are people out there doing some innovative stuff, I guess.
But there's also like music that has
stuff. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
What are you gonna say, Kevin?
Totally nothing relevant. I hate that kind of stuff. That kind of just like
me too, dude. It sucks.
Gimmicky.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, hey, notice me. Notice us. We're doing weird, wacky stuff.
I feel like that speaks to the ever-present moment of like performance art. Period.
Very much so.
And the last time there was performance art that I thought pushed any sort of boundaries, regardless of whether or not it was useful to do so or whether or not like it was cool or good, was definitely the 90s. I think Gen X based their entire sort of cultural, they oriented their personalities around this culture of shocking people. And that was like, and it was shock devoid of any sort of message or, whereas like the 1960s and 70s, a lot of the shocking things that people did were because they're trying to shake up the squares and get them to fucking put on the glasses put on the They Live glasses to see the world the way it really was. And where the Gen X was just like, what, you don't fucking like when I talk about my disgusting sexual proclivities in public? What's wrong with you? You're so repressed.
Yeah.
I almost welcome Gen Z's sort of like cultural prudishness compared to like that, like Gen X just vomiting their personal lives on anyone they come across on a regular basis. It's a millennial thing too, for sure. And the internet has made it like totally unbearable.
Well, the thing that we kind of probably alluded to that, we brought up the smartphone, right? Like how that basically created this. Fisher says that's like the beginning of us entering the cyber reality, right? Because we don't have to go to the computer anymore. It's always with us. We're constantly overstimulated, and that is part of why we can't be where we are, because we have all of everything everywhere all at once in our pocket at all times. So how could we not but reiterate and reproduce and copy and mimic? The foreclosure of boredom seems to be very much related to the loss of the future.
Yeah, it's almost like we just need to get more bored more often.
So we should not act and not think.
Just be.
I saw a YouTube video of a guy recently who he got a safe, he locked his smartphone in it, and he got his girlfriend to change the combination and write it down and keep it away from him for a month. So he got a landline installed. He started getting on his computer and downloading directions using like MapQuest type format, and he had to print out QR codes in order to go to the movies and to get on the bus and stuff like that. But it made me kind of just nostalgic for, I mean, first of all, for physical media, for one. Like, I figured out just recently, like, we were trying to find a show to watch. I think it was we wanted to watch Mad Men. Brittany and I did. And we're like, oh yeah, it'll be on Amazon or Netflix or something. And then I was like, what the fuck? Like, it's not on anything. We have to sign up to a new streaming service in order to watch this. And then anytime we want to watch a movie, we're like, oh, well, this streaming service has it, but this one doesn't. The ones that we're subscribed to don't have it. So, yep. And then I was just like, we've got DVDs. Let's go look in our DVDs and see what we have. So we busted out Mad Men, and we've been watching it on DVD, which made me think like, dude, we need to cut the cord. We need to just start like consuming physical media. If we took all of our the money that we spent on streaming, we could just buy things again and have them, and it would be awesome. Mm-hmm. I want to start buying records again and CDs, and just sort of try to distance myself as much from being physically tied in to streaming content at all times. It's going to sound sort of like a snobby thing, but like if you really look at the quality of streaming music, like on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever, as compared to a CD, it's fucking terrible. It's really bad. CDs actually are an excellent medium for listening to music. Yeah. That's where technology for listening to music peaked. And for whatever fucking reason, we're doing this terrible shit that gives us like all kinds of options at our fingertips, and it's worse. It's sort of just like a metaphor for capitalism in general. We've got 47 different kinds of fucking deodorants, so that when you use one and it doesn't work, once that one runs out, you can use a different one that doesn't work. I mean, deodorant works fine for me, but I hear a lot of people complaining about how deodorants don't work, whatever. just so everyone knows I'm not stinky. But like, yeah, it's just like what the bounty that we have, it's all shit. It's all worthless, useless crap that's bad for you, that kills you, that makes you stupid, that, it makes you sterile. It puts microplastics in your fucking brain tissue. Like,
well, yeah. And it just happens to also make you more and more divorced from yourself.
Yes.
More and more alienated. And so here's a little bit of a foreshadowing when it comes to future episodes. It turns out the Luddites were right, actually.
Рабочие и крестьяне не смогут прожить без нас некому будет установить порядок, определить работу, принудить к труду. Без нас все развалится и государство распадется.